The two gentlemen I'm about to introduce, you really don't want to miss them. They're fascinating. They're cool guys. They're father and son. They have been investigating our crazy little area for a long time, but more than just UFOs. So this is Paul and Ben Eno. Their talk is entitled Tlap Areas, UFOs and the Paranormal on Steroids. Good title. I'll just read their brief little intro here. And actually, I want to read their bio. I've got it. I've got your bio here somewhere. It's on my phone. And, Paul Eno has been called the most intelligent voice in paranormal research today. Several radio and television producers have called him simply incredible and absolutely fabulous. No kidding, just inspiring. He was one of the first paranormal investigators of the early 1970s, beginning while he was studying for the priesthood. His early mentors included parapsychology pioneer Dr. Louisa Rhine, that father, John J. Nicola, S.J., technical advisor for the film The Exorcist, and legendary first-generation ghost hunter Ed and Lorraine Warren. I'm sure there's a lot of people here who know Ed and Lorraine Warren. Paul and Ben are discussing their title. The description is Ghosts, Poltergeists, Bigfoot, and Entities that don't even have names yet. Find out why they appear so frequently in the same areas. Learn why so many of the famous cases like the Rendlesham Forest incident of 1980 and the Mothman affair of the 1960s may only be tips of some very big icebergs. By the way, I'll just mention, I was at Rendlesham a few years ago, and I spoke to people there who had creature sightings in that area. So there's a lot of overlap, I agree. Paul and Ben will have never before published material from new cases. Everything you know is wrong. So without any further waiting, Paul and Ben Eno. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I know. You've been telling me that for 10 years. Right. Well, thank you for coming, everyone. Hopefully this will work.
Hey, it does.
Yes. So let's jump right into it here. The most recent case we've been working on, and we work on cases, we don't swoop in like certain people on TV and visit and turn on all sorts of silly machines. And we have been working on a case of a triangle in Connecticut since 2005. As a matter of fact, I have pictures that I taught Ben with, and he's 13 years old holding our very first video camera as we were dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century.
It was like watching the Blair Witch Project. It was so shaky. I do not have steady hands.
Yeah, the cinematography needed a little work. You had to take Dramamine to watch it, but the point being that Ben was really young when we started this. Now, this is a new case in Pennsylvania. We call it the Pennsylvania Triangle, and I'll explain in a moment what I mean by Tlap areas. Now, this picture on the bottom, yeah, there you go, thank you, Ben. That was taken not in a parking lot with street lights. It was taken not in an area of a hilltop where one could see lights. It was taken right there in the upper picture, and lights have been seen many, many times by people. We've had neighborhood meetings here with 20 or more people. Now, a number of them has seen lights like this, 4 or 5 of them coming up out of the woods, out of this road. So is this a UFO? Or these UFOs? Well, I suppose you could call them that because they're unexplained.
In the most generic sense.
Yes.
I can project, Father.
Well, you've been telling me. He's usually our producer. He says, Dad, speak right into the microphone. He's been telling me that for 10 years on the air. Now I can tell him to do it.
Well, I suppose you can.
There we are. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So in a brand new case, we'll probably be working on it. Let's see, how old will I be in 15 years? I don't want to think about it, but we'll probably still be working on this case. So Tlap areas. It's a strange term, but it means, to us anyway, geographical points of interest, overwash or overlap between parallel, sometimes very different worlds with different laws of physics sharing or sometimes disrupting the same space and time. Areas are sometimes bounded by rivers. I wish a parallel world would swallow all that noise out there. Sometimes bounded by rivers or quartz veins, and are common when gravitational irregularities are present, such as in the Bouguer anomaly, which is a recognized scientific phenomenon which is very weird and seems to be present in most or all of these Tlap areas. Now, what the Bouguer anomaly is is a gravitational anomaly. It's recognized by geographers, geologists, and oddly enough, let's take the Mothman situation, for example. If anyone doesn't know what that is, in the mid-1960s, people in the area of the Ohio Valley of the United States began to see some very strange creatures, notably something the press dubbed Mothman. They were going to call it Batman, actually, but the Batman TV series was starting and they were afraid of a giant lawsuit, so it ended up with Mothman. This was a creature, and again, you couldn't make this stuff up. This is a creature which apparently looked like a man, very muscular, but had very large wings, kind of like a bat. And it's often, well, I'll show you some depictions of it later, but it was that's what where the name comes from. But you had the Mothman situation, but there were a lot of other things going on at the same time. Ghost phenomena. People were seeing UFOs in tremendous numbers. As a matter of fact, there's a place along one of the roads near the Ohio River. People would gather in the evenings just to watch the UFOs. Like, you go to the drive-in movie in those days, you went to watch the UFOs. There were all sorts of ghost phenomena would occur. We were down there in '03. Ben was just a wee lad. And we were talking with some witnesses who were, of course, much older at this point. And one of them said they heard footsteps on their roof at night, about 2 and 3 in the morning. And that sometimes there would be red eyes looking through their windows or even out from under their furniture. Now, the red eye thing is something all the witnesses to Mothman agree on. They had these blazing red eyes, which led some people to wonder if it wasn't artificial or mechanical. That's one of the things that's been discussed. So that's what the Mothman thing is. But the point here is that the Bouguer anomaly runs from north of Pittsburgh, roughly from where we're investigating the Pennsylvania Triangle, all the way down through the Ohio Valley, all the way to Louisville, Kentucky, roughly. Right through the area where the Mothman incidents occurred. Now, with the Bouguer anomaly, one expects that the closer you would get to the center of the Earth, the more gravity there would be. But with the Bouguer anomaly, no one really knows why, the closer you get, like down a hill toward a river valley, the lighter you become. It's really not, you can't feel it or it's not measurable, but that's what the Bouguer anomaly is. As you get closer to the center of the Earth in these areas, the gravity gets lighter. Well, what's that got to do with anything? Well, gravity, electromagnetism, and various geotechnical phenomena, factors, we find has a lot to do with everything that's paranormal. And this is why I think one of the reasons we believe that it's one of the ducks that has to be lined up for a flap area to occur. Next, please. Here are typical flap area phenomena. Nightly UFOs, sometimes witnessed by hundreds, as in that case. In our case in Litchfield, Connecticut, that we've been working on for 12 years, people would gather Goshen, Connecticut. They'd be getting out of their cars, watching the UFOs in the sky. We ourselves saw strange lights going down behind Mohawk Mountain. Things come and go through holes in the sky and the air. If you were to look at the so-called Skinwalker Ranch case that's going on in Utah and has been for some time, that's supposedly been studied by a group of scientists that has now been disbanded for some strange reason, they would describe things coming through holes in the sky and the air, UFOs, odd creatures, things that don't even have names yet. Apportation, that's the movement of objects by invisible means, to put it simply. Objects and animals. In that Skinwalker Ranch case, a bunch of cows literally disappeared and appeared inside a trailer. Now, that's one of the many things that has happened there. Sea and lake monsters, ultra bizarre cryptids. In the Connecticut case, we have people witnessing bizarre box-like figures kind of dancing by their windows, things you really couldn't describe, but they seem to be animate creatures. Alien encounters, Bigfoot, Greys, and we all know what they are, I would think, seen in homes. Parasite poltergeist activity, slips in time and space, giant birds, ghost encounters, reports of heightened psychic abilities. We had, well, in the Mothman case at least, there was a man who's, usually you think, if you read about the Mothman case, everybody's totally terrified, the red eyes, everybody freaks. Well, there have been several instances, and several of them have been on our show, where they had positive Mothman experiences. Gary Colvin, for example, Kevin Colvin, who now lives in the Midwest, had a Mothman experience as a child with his entire family. The next day, He was a math whiz. He could draw like Picasso, and all sorts of wonderful things happened in his life. So he credits Mothman with almost being an angel, at least for him. Waking visions and vivid dreams. I'm thinking particularly of what our good friend Linda Godfrey calls, we'll talk about it in a little while, the Jefferson County Square of Weirdness. 13 square miles in Wisconsin where all this stuff happens. And people will go to a certain area where there's a mound and they have visions, and especially if they meditate. People have never had these things happen before. Military activity throughout the area. Aha. We run into this every single Tlap area. We run into military activity. Now, why could that? In 2009 and 2010, in the Connecticut case, they didn't care who knew it. I mean, we're talking ground troops, C-130s, and black helicopters. If it really was the military, because we have suspicions in all sorts of directions. Anything you want to contribute here, Ben, to this, let me know.
Oh, I will.
Okay, good. Waking visions, as I say, military activity, black helicopters, men in black, because that was all over the Mothman case. If you don't know what that is, maybe you've seen the films. Supposedly these people in black, always wearing sunglasses. At times, according to witnesses who told us, they didn't seem familiar with basic customs such as shaking hands, things of this kind. On several occasions, they would ask to look at ashtrays and very common object, a pencil, as if they'd never seen anything like it before, and ask to keep it, and then go scurrying away as if they had some valuable antique. I mean, what the hey is going on here anyway? So, mass changes in public behavior. In the Connecticut case, there was a long period in 2009 when people started driving on the wrong side of the road. Now, we all know New England drivers are no prizes, but they usually manage to stay on the right side of the road. But of course, there were accidents. When this began to be noticed in the public media and social media, it all changed. People started driving off the road and hitting trees. And I'm talking in numbers that are way beyond statistical probability for the population of an area like this. These are all from police reports. So strange changes in public behavior, electronic voice phenomena, Bigfoot sightings, the Mandela effect increases. That's a long story, so I won't get into it now. Animal mutilations, people encountering different versions of themselves or others. Ben, you remember the woman who wrote into the show who said that she walked into her kitchen, and there she was sitting at the island in the middle of the kitchen. So seeing, and this is what started making me suspicious back in the 70s, after dealing with cases of what were supposed to be ghosts. The old ideas just weren't good enough. Why were we seeing them in clothes? Are there ghost clothing? You know, why were we seeing animals, hearing the daily life of people who seemed to be carrying on farm life in the 1700s? Were these the spirits of dead people, or were we dealing more with time than we were with death? Which it turns out that in the multiverse scenario, death can't even exist, not even for the body. Yes.
Time also doesn't exist, just adding that.
Yes. Well, in 1952, Albert Einstein wrote a book called Relativity and essentially proved that everything is simultaneous. There is no past, there is no future. That's just how we experience it. And we think that just because we experience it, it's real as we experience it. And that doesn't seem to be true of very many things, including paranormal things or things having to do with time. These are all things we get into later. Animal mutilations. People encountering different versions of themselves often overlaps sacred native lands. So let's go to the next. What did I do with the thing? Thank you. You didn't lose it. Good. Our remote ancestors seem to know all about this. We're the ones who seem to have forgotten it. Now, I spent in the line of duty many, many years ago, I won't say how long. I was in Australia waiting for extraction from the outside of the Melbourne area. And I spent about 7 hours talking with a very elderly, very diminutive Aboriginal elder by the name of Mindalooey. And I was very fortunate because they usually don't talk to outsiders. But Mindalooey said, and I was telling him I was running into all this stuff in the paranormal, and I didn't quite understand what was happening. And I was starting to think about this idea of the many worlds theory of quantum mechanics. And he said, "You're on the right track. That's exactly what we do." He was a shaman. We go into other worlds, literally. We take things that we need here, such as if somebody has cancer. There are bound to be other versions of worlds and of themselves where they don't have cancer. So they said, we go in, we well, I suppose he didn't say this, but a physicist would say you collapse the wave function, the two worlds become one, and the person doesn't have cancer anymore. That's pretty much the way he described it in his own way. And that was only the beginning. So if you look back, these are 30,000-year-old Australian cave drawings. You've got Bigfoot, or at least what looks like it, grays, a craft perhaps, figures with the nimby or the nimbus or the halo or whatever. Everything that we describe when we're talking to people who've been abducted or people who've had experiences 30,000 years ago. And of course, if our remote ancestors, such as Mindalooey's ancestors, people like this, people whose DNA goes back at least 30 to 40,000 years, and we're also talking about the Khoisan and Khoisan Bushmen of South Africa, whose DNA goes back 150,000 years. We're talking about unbroken traditions that believe exactly what we're talking about here. And any student of folklore will tell you that these things don't just come out of the air because people had nothing better to do. People believed they were dealing with supernatural beings. They believed they were dealing with things that they couldn't explain, and they came down to us in the form of myth and folklore, which is what? Myth and folklore are the vessels of the memory of the human race. Next, please. And so we're the ones who've forgotten them. However, we do seem to be rediscovering things. As just an example of headlines. Everybody's astounded. Scientists are really saying that there really are multiversal scenarios here. The disagreement is, what do they mean? What do they mean for us? How real are they? And should we tell people about it? And we'll get to that at the end, but I think that there's a reason why this is not really being disseminated, and I think it's why the military is studying it. Wouldn't we love to weaponize the paranormal? Because the paranormal, of course, is powered, we believe, by the multiverse. Next, please. Now, here's an example of our flap areas where the paranormal is on steroids. These are just areas that we are studying. And, of course, the Ohio Valley Mothman situation. You want to describe it?
Oh, I'll describe them. So, now we talked about Mothman at length for the last 10 minutes, so let's talk about something else. We have the Bridgewater Triangle down in Massachusetts, so if anyone's ever been to Freetown State Forest, which is a fun and also terrible place to go, it is one of the big portions of the triangle. People tend to go down there, ride dirt bikes and stuff like that, but, I've heard a lot of stories from coworkers and people who live around there of, people getting chased by dogs with red eyes, big feet coming out of nowhere, lifting cop cars and throwing them on the ground, all sorts of stuff like that. So it encompasses many areas of the paranormal, not just, ghosts and cryptids and stuff, but, people have seen UFOs over there, and even Pukwudgie, but we'll talk about that a little later. We have the Litchfield County Triangle in Connecticut, which is what we were just mentioning about the mass changes in behavior. So that was one of the big things that was going on there. Not to mention, the military activity and all of that, but it was just a very odd place for many reasons. Mostly the mass changes in behavior, like my father was mentioning, people driving on the wrong side of the road, then crashing into trees once people noticed that. Then once people noticed that, it turned into suicides at an inordinate rate. I mean, this is middle of nowhere Connecticut, it'd be surprising if people committed, suicide at all there, let alone, inordinate numbers of people committing suicide. So it just doesn't make any sense. And, when people bring it up, the local authorities are like, oh, no, it's fine, nothing to worry about. And not only that, there's an abandoned farm. I say that in the loosest terms possible because, we'll talk about that a little later as well, on top of, people seeing Bigfoot and lights in the sky and even Mothman occasionally, all sorts of stuff like that. Then we have the Pennsylvania Triangle, which we recently started investigating last year, and I only went on one trip. You have been on three? 3 trips. So he's been on 3, I've been on 1, so I have to catch up. And that includes, more Bigfoot than anything else. For some reason, certain sites tend to lean towards different phenomena rather than, it is all encompassing, but you do see lights in the sky, Bigfoot, but not so much, ghost activity, although there were some shadow people sightings in there, I'll have you know. And then there's the Rendlesham Forest in, England, where I'm sure we've all heard the stories of, Bentwater Air Force Base and all of that, which we did 16 hours on the air about, so we've pretty much become tired of the subject, no offense, but but if you want to hear about all the stuff that we have, you can check out our website. We have cards and stuff out there. But there's also, you know, everyone seems to neglect that there's also been all sorts of history of paranormal activity there, like the Green Children of Woolpit, who are also in that area, little green children that came around in the 1300s. And people were, oh, where'd you come from? They're like, oh, underground. So it's all sorts of weird stuff like that, including black dogs, ghost phenomena, poltergeists, and, you know, UFOs, of course. So this is the beginning of our Pennsylvania Triangle investigation. So over here, I wish that this actually works, so I have to use the other. This over here looks like an ordinary rock, but is not an ordinary rock. In fact, it is a piece of an asteroid, or is it a comet, technically? Asteroid.
They can't. The University of Pennsylvania investigated it. There's every opinion from melted metal all the way down to meteorite material. So.
Well, they said it wasn't a meteor because if it was a meteor, it would cut glass, or something to that effect. I can't remember what it was that they used, but they're like, oh, well, it doesn't do this one certain characteristic, so it's not a meteor.
The report is ambiguous.
It is ambiguous. The report is incredibly ambiguous, but the owner of the property that was so gracious to let us, you know, stay with them and, you know, let us investigate their property, has a whole collection of rocks like these. But they're not just rocks. You know, there was supposedly, you know, a comet that crashed on this hill next to the house that we were staying in, and it's just filled with metal. And my father has a metal allergy, so when he stepped upon this property, he he almost fainted. So that was great. Too bad I didn't get to see that, because that would have been both horrible and hilarious. So
You're not going to get back at the wheel that way.
it's okay. I've accepted my fate at this point. So, as I mentioned, shadow people as well. We've been investigating one of the other houses on this property, which it's 2 hills, which the way it was described to me, it sounded like it was like tracts and miles of land, when really it's only about maybe 30 acres. But so much happens, including seeing black helicopters that have no insignia whatsoever, military interest in the area, which would be the black helicopters, and shadow people, where the woman who owned this particular house was having problems with shadow people. People, you know, she would be laying in her bed at night and look out her bedroom door and see like you know, someone watching her, like from the hallway. And, you know, we brought Shane Searway with us, who unfortunately could not be here today, but he was very integral in dealing with the shadow people problem. And he's, you know, a Blackfoot shaman and a very, very good friend of ours, and he knows what he's doing. So he was able to negotiate with these shadow people. By that I mean just essentially being there and getting them to leave these people alone. Moving on. Ah, yes. This is the best slide that we have. So this was from our expedition this 5 weeks ago. Wow, feels like it's been forever. So this evening, it was the first night we were there. We unfortunately didn't get much of a chance because my work schedule is very unforgiving. So we were able to spend one night essentially outside in this one camping ground where most of the phenomena take place. So in this campground, essentially you have a lot of groundwater going on, and because of that comet that hit the ground, there's a lot of metal. So groundwater, metal interacting, you essentially have electromagnetic fields that can conduct phenomena. So we didn't see these lights, but we got them on video, you know, which my dad's videography skills are as good as mine, they're terrible, which is why I'm a sound guy. So we did actually get these sets of lights, which we did not see. There were a couple little lanterns on the ground, like one of those solar ones you can buy at like Job Lot or whatever the equivalent of that is in New Hampshire. But they weren't that bright. They're incredibly dim, and you know you can buy them for like $5, so they're not nearly that bright. Yeah, I was over here. I was told to go wander around and see what I picked up, because that's kind of my job, because I am not very good with cameras. So, moving on.
If I could just explain.
Fine, take it.
Yeah, these lights were taken pretty much from where it says September 16th, 2016. That's where I was standing when I took that picture. On that particular date, there was some really odd orb like shooting up in the air. And this is farther down the hill, as if you were to walk down this hill and turn around, that's what you'd see. So just to give some perspective as to where that was. And again, that has been seen by a number of people. This is taken in May 20th, 2016. in a field at the other end of the property, and you have this line of colored lights, which was very odd. And we again, well, the next thing that happened, I was looking for something like this. That's not what I got. This is a shot from 2016 as well. One of the local people who lives on that hill Ben just described, it's full of metal from a crash of apparently a meteorite. Is got this thing on her back. Again, this is right next to the house where the shadow people phenomena seems to be occurring. I'm not entirely sure what this is, but it checks out as something legitimately anomalous. You're never going to see what's in this video because it's too light in here, so I'm just going to describe it. I'm panning from here to the right, and there is a figure comes up out of the woods. It turned out to be Ben, so it wasn't Bigfoot or anything. But before you get to that, there's another figure that appears to be moving independently of the background. Now, I take very, very careful note of where I'm standing, what I'm taking pictures with, what the conditions were, who's in the picture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this, you remember that night, it was deathly still.
Yeah, it was weird. You know, usually if you're outside in the woods at night, you know, it's pretty loud. Especially if there's nothing else going on, middle of nowhere. You know, you have all sorts of bugs that are screaming all night, and you know you have birds and all that occasionally. But it would get deathly silent, like you could hear a pin drop silent, and it would just come out of nowhere too. You'd sort of see this kind of mist forming around the campground that we were at, which seems to be the center of most of this phenomenon. And I thought it was interesting because I was told nothing about this place other than seeing a few pictures and expecting this place to be much larger than it was. So when I got there, I was like, oh, wow, this is really small. Like how does all this happen in such a small area? Well, I found out mostly because of the time we spent in that little campground, which was incredible to say the least, because it was just it would get really quiet. Like, I can't even describe the quiet to you. It's like one of those chambers that's like so, like, you know, it's so quiet that it's just deafeningly silent. You can hear your heartbeat and stuff. It's it was really creepy, but also kind of serene and peaceful.
Yeah. So whatever that figure is, it's still being looked at by Mark D'Antonio, the MUFON photo expert, among other people. Now, this is what happened on September 16th of last year. That's my. You could just see the truck there, Ben? Yeah, there you go. That's my poor old truck, and I had pulled up to the edge of the field where the strange lights had been seen and where we got some photographs of these things. Now, I'm expecting strange lights, right? So it was kind of chilly that night. Brilliant moonlight, if you remember. Well, you probably don't remember September 16th, but it was very brightly lit. I had the window down on the driver's side of the truck, but the other side was closed because it was chilly. So I'm looking around, I'm expecting lights, I had the cameras on that. All of a sudden, something to my right catches my attention. There in this brilliant moonlight is this huge two-legged figure. I remember specifically the huge brown fur and the legs moving up and down, walking very slowly up into the center of this field where you can see that Bigfoot-type figure there. I remember its head kind of bowed as if it were looking for something on the ground. And I'm just staring at this. And people say, and we always ask people this on the air too, how did you feel when you were having this experience? Some people say, well, I was terrified. Other people say, I was completely at peace. That's what I was. I think a lot of these paranormal phenomena depend on what you bring with you, you know. So I felt totally at peace, but I not enough to not put up the infrared camera and trying to take a picture of it. Of course, I'm shooting through a cold window. Naturally, there's no heat signature. So I get out of the truck very slowly, and my phone rings. It's Ben's mom. Closest I ever came to divorce. And I said, I'm in the middle of a Bigfoot sighting. So what? And of course, my ringtone is the theme from Lord of the Rings, which goes blasting out across this field. So naturally, I get out there, and whatever it was gone. And then about 2 or 3 minutes later, I see these lights in this tree. And they didn't look weird. They looked like somebody had a spotlight on the ground. And I was going to take off after it, but I didn't know, you know, it's tall grass. There might have been a yawning chasm in the field. I didn't want to have my truck swallowed up. So the next night at a neighborhood meeting, we had like 20 people show up who had all seen strange lights and Bigfoot. or Bigfoot-like creatures. Some of them were not that much like Bigfoot, but enough to be weird. And I was relating this story, and a hand went up. And it was Melissa from Melissa's house here. She said, "Oh, those lights, that was us," meaning herself and her son. And she said, "We came home, and we heard something big moving through that field right above our house. At the same time, I was seeing it." They went up into the field to try to find it with the flashlights. And they said that they couldn't see anything, because these things come and go very, very quickly somehow. Large, 400 to 500 pound mammals coming and going very quickly. That's odd in itself, and we have theories about that, which of course, as you might imagine, is related to these world boundaries. So that, if it's what it appears to be, was independent corroboration of something big moving through that field. Next, please. I do. Look at that. Just testing you there. Okay. All right. Now, of course, again, it's not nearly dark enough in here, but this is the picture I snapped through the window, which is absolutely useless. I mean, you can't even see the thing. But that's essentially where it was. Yes. The next day, Shane Searway was with us. If you don't know Shane, he's one of the best paranormal investigators in the world and one of the least known. He doesn't seek any kind of publicity. But he goes in to nasty cases, following in some cases all the big shots you see on TV who make a pig's breakfast out of the case. He goes in and straightens it out in one trip. He's amazing. Large, two-legged something came through here about 200 feet from where I was. Next, please. And Shane reenacted that the next day. All I can think of is dear old Bobo, you know, on whatever it is, the Bigfoot Hunters, Finding Bigfoot. And that's essentially where I was, and that's where, and the figure was about 1.5 to 2 feet taller than he is, and he's 6 feet tall. Next, please. All right. Now, before this, 6 months before this, we had been in this area, and Shane himself had seen a large creature. And again, these creatures are always seen in the proximity of lights. Coming up from Melissa's house, the place I just mentioned, you always had, almost every night, there are strange lights that appear over this house. So there seems to be some sort of affinity between UFOs, or something that is equivalent to that, and these strange creatures. Now, Shane was, it was a rainy day in May of last year, and Shane happened to be sitting in his truck at this campground area Ben was talking about. All of a sudden he looks up, and there's a huge black furry creature between these trees. He assumed it was a bear, because this is bear country. Well, he started his truck to take off after it, and it took off to its right, and he saw it was not a bear, it was on two legs, and these huge arms were going back and forth like that. And the thing flushed 3 deer in the process. So all these deer come charging out of there too. And he is pointing out on a later trip that this thing reached to the height of that sign, which again is about 2 feet taller than he is. So it was about 8 feet high. Okay, next, please. These are some other various photos that were taken of sort of strange lights in the trip before I happened to see the Bigfoot. Okay, and you can see there again, if it was darker, you could see, and that's a deer stand, and that's me standing. You can't see me either, except my bald patch there on top of the deer stand, and that's one of the areas we were operating in. Next, so a lot of strange lights. Here is one, again, it's not really dark enough, but if you see that there's like a beam of light coming down out of the sky into the middle of the field. Now, the thing you have to watch out for, especially you ghost hunter types, if you're taking flash photography at night, particularly in the summer, and bugs go by, they're going to look like orbs, and they're going to leave a light trail and all this stuff, depending on the settings of your camera. So we take all this with a pillar of salt half the time. But this particular one, and our Killjoy photo experts include Mark D'Antonio from MUFON, a real astronomer who's a photo expert, said, this is a beam coming down out of the sky, and it's landing in the middle of the field. Why? I don't know. Okay, and there is that strange thing in the sky as well. Next, please. We were on this hill with all the metal in it on the first trip here, and there was a very large, and it was a little clearer, you could see the toe marks and this sort of thing, and that's my big foot there, and this is bigger than my foot, which is saying a lot. So whatever it was, and the question arises, how come you have these, a trail of footprints that will sort of start where, middle of nowhere, and then go maybe 10, 15 feet, and then disappear? Why is that? Next, please. Now, this is sort of at the edge of what we've so far determined is the triangle area. And you can see, we've seen this in a number of other photos. The poor dog, whose name is Remy, his posterior is disappearing. or is transparent. You can see right through it. See the chair? You point that again, Ben, because in case people can't see it. That red chair behind. We've seen pictures like this in the past. We had one sent to us by a reporter friend of mine from the Baltimore Sun, and it was some years ago. There was a woman sitting at the office of an optometrist, and the press was following her around because she'd been a concentration camp survivor. Really interesting life, so they were doing a feature story. And here she is in the optometrist's office. You can see right through the man's hand to her head. I should have put that in here. And you can see right through his shoulders into some of his equipment behind. The first question the reporter asked, "Do you think the guy's an angel?" I said, "Well, I'm sure he's a nice guy, but he's a licensed optometrist in the state of Maryland, so I don't know." So, in any case, these things do happen, and I think it's because of a multiversal intersection between brains, B-R-A-N-E-S, as a physicist would say membranes, or brains, B-R-A-N-E-S, and in this case, in one version of the world, this dog was not there. In the other version, the dog is there. And you just catch it at just the right moment. Conditions are just right, so you capture it in digital media, and you've got a multiple world intersect right there. Next, please. That's our theory anyway. MONSTERLAND. Anybody here from the Leominster area will know about MONSTERLAND. There we go. There was a hand, enthusiastic listener there. And I was there, and you can see that's me on the right, and our good friend Ronnie LeBlanc, the author of the book known as MONSTERLAND. And on the left is Steve LaPlume from the Leominster area, who was none other than a man who was serving in the U.S. Air Force Security Services while the Rendlesham Forest affair was going on at RAF Bentwaters in 1980. And that he sort of helps us on cases down there. He co-hosts the show now and then. And he agrees with us. The less said about Rendlesham, the better. We've done more on the air about that than any show on radio and TV. So Ben is right. We're kind of sick of it. So we were up there. This is last April 22nd, and I always joke that's me there, the old man of the sea, wondering why he's in the woods. And then there's Steve and Ronnie there as well, and a lot of strange things in Leominster State Forest, including a lot of Bigfoot sightings. And anybody who grew up there will tell you that they would go out there, they call it MONSTERLAND, because the kids would go out, they'd be, messing around, and something would throw things at them from the woods, rocks, and there would be sightings of what can only be called Bigfoot. We found some, we didn't find much today. We were there, but we hiked the whole area, and Steve was pointing to the lake monster. No, he just pointed, I just thought that was a good shot. But MONSTERLAND is an area right now, not that far from here, and is an area we're beginning to investigate as a flap area. Next, please. Here's our Jefferson County Square of Weirdness, only 13 square miles in Wisconsin. And this is an area we are monitoring, but it is really being studied by Linda Godfrey. And if you haven't read her books, you should. She's a journalist like myself, and she has written a number of books, particularly on upright canine cryptids. Nobody, you call them werewolves, but that's got too much baggage. And nobody believes they actually, somebody turns into a werewolf and the snout comes out at night and all this business when there's a full moon. And I got to say, Ben, on the left there, I don't believe for a minute that's actually the Beast of Bray Road. Looks more to me like a lion in the moonlight in Africa or something. But who knows? I wasn't there. I don't know. In the middle is Rocky, the monster of Rock Lake, supposedly. And this is all within 13 square miles. Again, another flap area. This is where people you can see people there on the right. There are a number of mounds from the Adena culture that are there, a Native American culture that not a lot is known about, but that built mounds and pyramids, things of this kind, much like you would have found in the old world. So you have all sorts of interesting things going on there, including the visions and all sorts of things that occur at night. There's a ghost road, as they call it, and things of this kind. Next, please. Just another example. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty here. If you want to tell people how we got involved in the Skinwalker Ranch there in Connecticut. They won't let us near the one in Utah, but who needs it when you got this one?
Well, actually, how did we get involved? It just sort of, we fell into it, didn't we? There was, I remember now. Yes. Yeah, the owner of, oh, crap. I was holding the wrong thing. Here, take this. Thank you. So the owner of this house right here, a fine lady who read my father's book, Footsteps in the Attic, and saw the theories of the multiverse, was like, this is it. This is exactly what's going on at my house. So we got a little message from her, and so we mounted up, bought our camera here, which is, I can't even remember what it was, but it was it was incredibly old, and it was new at the time, but now it is incredibly old. So we showed up, and this woman is incredibly nice, and she talked her ear off the whole time about everything that's happened in her house. And this house has been in her family for what, since 1793, that they lived in this same house. Like every single one of the generations of her family have lived there. So it's been everything from a general store to a farm to pretty much anything. So, as soon as you walk in, all 10 generations have not left. So basically, the house is incredibly crowded, and you walk in and you just like feel stifled. It's like being in a big room like this, except like three-quarters of the size. And it was a really interesting place because the first day we got there, my father heard and felt a horse run by, and felt the wind coming off of it, and it just heard it running off into the road. Too bad you don't have a picture of it. Yeah. But you see all sorts of the classic cliche kind of haunted house things where you see orbs all the time. But then the more time we spent there, the more weird the place got. So it went from generic, oh, it's just dead people kind of things to seeing creatures that don't have names yet, like little bouncing black balls that would bounce by the windows. You'd see like the blue light phenomena that's often like accompanied by abduction cases and stuff like that. And she would put out this little recorder, digital recorder, and get EVPs every single night. And it would get weirder and weirder. Like it would sound like there were like weird beasts like growling into it. It got very strange after a while. So then it evolved into not just this house, but the more we started questioning, it ended up turning out to be the whole county that we were. You can go to the next slide. It turned out to be the whole county. So it turned out that there was about 318 ghost or poltergeist reports, 77 UFO sightings by multiple people, 5 Bigfoot reports, 18 reports of other cryptids, I already mentioned Mothman, and multiple reports of military activity and encounters, and reports of paranormal activity going back at least 70 years. So this is where, really, my father and I sort of started putting into place, maybe we should stop looking at just one house and just, focus on a bigger area. So rather than doing a micro study, do a macro study and see how the whole area is affected rather than just the house. So that's really what sort of threw us into the whole, flap area phenomenon. So, we ourselves haven't experienced, I wouldn't say that, but, there's been sightings of, black helicopters, military vehicles coming in and out of certain roads. There was, again, Mark D'Antonio comes up, a good friend of his who's been fishing at the same pond for years. One day went to go fishing at this pond. 2 guys in fatigues and M16s come out of the woods and say, "Sorry, sir, you're not allowed to fish here anymore." So, not the only people, but certainly a lot of other people have dealt with the military in this area, told to get out of certain places for who knows what reason. Next slide, please.
Just an example of possible multi-world action here. And this is really strange because you've not only got 2 versions of the same room, seemingly on 2 sides of a brain. There is what appears to be, and somebody pointed, all these experts are looking at this picture for years, and finally a listener from Colorado said, "How come you didn't mention the alien?" So we looked at this again, and apparently over on the right, there's this, and it's much clearer in a darker room, but what appears to be, and it is not part of that refrigerator, it is a 3-dimensional head, I guess, or object at least, looking from behind that wall. And then, just last year, that yellow dot appeared in the photo.
Yeah, we were speaking at the Stratum conference not too long ago, and we were in the middle of doing this presentation, and I stopped and looked, and I was like, was that yellow dot always there? And we both stopped, like, no. Somehow that yellow dot got there, and that has not been there before.
Yeah, things appear and disappear, and, you take great care to take care of these things and to make sure that the film, in the case of old stuff, and is not damaged in any way, but this just appears. I have objects that have appeared and disappeared. I have a coin from a country that never existed that comes and goes. I mean, this is the nature of the multiverse once you're aware of it. This appears to be something looking out again from behind the door. This is all in this house where this began sort of a hand sort of appearing in this. One of the more interesting phenomena, and you can go to our show Facebook page, Behind the Paranormal, and see this whole video. The little boy was 4 years old and said that his invisible friend Ashwar was in the tree outside the house. Now, we'd been doing a pilot with a New York film crew, and they had left, and it was very cold outside. So I went up and I pointed the infrared camera up into the tree. And sure enough, in the video, which you can see, there's sort of a tadpole-like, I guess you can see it there kind of on the left bend, a tadpole-like figure coming down out of the tree about 6 seconds in, and it comes down, and then in the last frame, there's a flash, and it just disappears. I mean, was that Ashwar? And if so, what sort of creature is this? Now, other people have written in from other areas with security camera footage. You know, every time we speak here, the whole fire department is on some kind of drill. Every single time. Anyway, with creatures very much like this tadpole-like figure. Now, if you can tell me what this is, my golly. This was taken in an area, again, not too far from the house in Torrington, Connecticut, where there had been a number of break-ins in a neighborhood. And people, these particular people, put security cameras in their house, and they weren't home one morning. And all of a sudden, they come back, and there's this thing standing by the sink in their kitchen. And, I mean, what would you call this? I mean, alien, reptilian, ghost? I mean, again, this is typical for this area. Again, things that don't even have names yet. Bigfoot, everybody says, oh, it's a pile of rocks. Well, unfortunately, this is a video, and you can actually see the thing walking from left to right. One of several sightings in this area. The blue beam phenomenon Ben mentioned. All sorts of very odd lights. And, of course, the ubiquitous UFOs, all within this area, which has grown to about 200 square miles, including the part of the Hudson Valley as well, where, as you may know, there were tremendous UFO sightings, particularly in the 1980s. We call it a triangle, which is very arbitrary, but we do seem to have, there seem to be power points, for lack of a better term. And the 1783 farmhouse there on the right is where this began, the house Ben was talking about. And then over to this, we call it the funny farm. A farm where there's no farming. Point 3, well, Ben doesn't like to talk about what happened there, but that seems to be point 3. This is how it looked in 2010. Rundown farm where no farming had taken place, apparently abandoned. The same aerial photograph from the same period, looks kind of ratty, but there is a kind of a decent farmhouse there on the right. Now, all of a sudden in 2012, and nobody, how do you cover something of this scope? How do you investigate a case like this? With our radio show, we kind of use it as a weapon. We have listeners whom we appoint as reporters, and we have a sort of a spy network, for lack of a better term, in areas like this. And most of them don't know each other, and they report to us independently, and we kind of take it for what it's worth, and we put it together into some kind of conclusion. Not perfect, but it works to a point. The barn was torn down, but not the silos. 2013, you have a huge metal sheet, and apparently you have some sort of excavation that has gone on around the edges of this. For what reason, we're not entirely sure. And then all of a sudden, you've got the mystery farm where there's no farming, and you have all sorts of beautiful new buildings there, and those silos are still there. This is where the military activity was centered in 2009 and 2010. There was still all kinds of strange air activity, and there was no farming whatsoever. There is evidence of underground ventilation as well. And again, these doors look like they've never been opened. There's excavation still going on. Could be nothing, could be something. Now, we thought it was something for two reasons. It was 2 years ago, 2015, there was a man listening to one of Shane Searway's lectures. Now, Shane is working with us on this case. And then I came up to him and said, I can't believe you mentioned that place. I worked for such and such electronics company, and I installed, in 2013, all kinds of very strange radio equipment at this farm. And also, I served, I'm a veteran, had some military intelligence training and a lot of stuff I can't talk about, but I have 1 or 2 connections still. Gave them this address. We were told to back off, which of course is pretty obvious that something is going on there. what we're not sure. Right across the dirt road is an area with a building where strange things happen to you, with no windows, cinder blocks, and a very tall antenna, which is painted in aircraft colors, such as you'd see at an airport. Well, we found out that it belongs to the U.S. Army. And all sorts of wires come out of there, go down into the ground, or come out of the ground, go from this place over to that farm. So something fishy is going on, and if we don't get arrested or shot, we might find out what it is eventually. Here's Mark D'Antonio on the left. Many of you know him. He speaks for the MUFON events all over the place, very well thought of, real astronomer. We were doing some drone work, and we plan to do more. I can't tell you when and where. That's Ben there with the controls, and William J. Hall, the author of the book, The World's Most Haunted House, and the first book on this Tlap area, which is the Haunted House Diaries. And I told him, this is not ready for prime time. And I challenged him as a joke to write it, and he wrote the book anyway. So it's only just beginning to become apparent, all the sort of the iceberg, tip of the iceberg stuff that's going on here. Just briefly, because we're running out of time, but the Bridgewater Triangle Ben was describing, all sorts of strange things going on, and including, as Ben mentioned, Puckwood.
So there's this sort of this native part of Native American mythology. If I can start speaking English, a Pukwudgeej, and Pukwudgeej are essentially tiny people that are incredibly hairy, and they were they're considered tricksters and try to trick people into going in the woods, and the people are never seen again. So there was a guy who was walking his dog alone at night. Can't remember his name off the top of my head.
I'm not going to say his name. The dog's name is Bingo.
Well, the dog's name is Bingo, so we know the dog's name. That's a plus. So him and Bingo were outside for a walk, and while they were walking along, the Freetown State Forest line, they see a little man who looks similar to this step out and sort of like wave him in, like trying to get him to come into the woods. And Bingo was not a fan of this little man, so he started barking at him, and the guy was like, "That's a little weird. I'm just gonna go away and never walk over here again." So there's all sorts of stories about Pukwudgeej, and we even have what we think are pictures of them. If they're next in the slide, no, they're not. There they are. So we, this is me over here experiencing some of the other weird phenomena that were going on at the time. But the more interesting thing is these two figures that we got pictures of. And usually in nature, if you take pictures, flesh tones are very odd. You usually don't see that unless there's fungi, mushrooms and such. And it looks like there's a little person here with clothes and stuff, and then someone else hanging out back there. You can kind of see a little face with hair, eyes, nose, that kind of thing. So take it for what it is. Maybe it's Pukwudgeej. Some people say fairies, which surprisingly we get a lot of reaction whenever we mention fairies on the show, and all that good stuff.
Of course, Rendlesham Forest, you're familiar with that. We were there. I guess Ben was having, he tends to have very deep experiences, and we hadn't even gotten out of the parking lot at night. We were with Larry Warren, one of the witnesses, and some local listeners to the show. Ben collapsed in the parking lot, and all the dogs up and down the road started to howl, including the dog who was with us. He doesn't remember most of this stuff. But in any case, we had a lot of strange things. This, by the way, supposedly is a picture of the craft, one of the craft, on the ground during the actual Rendlesham incident. This was smuggled out of Washington, D.C., so I was told. So just as a point of interest. And, of course, that bunch of lights in the center. And if you're not familiar with the case, you can read about it. It's a real blockbuster. People have experienced strange markings on their bodies after coming out of there. So the point being, a Tlap area, there are a number of different phenomena going on. As Ben mentioned, Yeti, they call them Yeti there, Bigfoot, been seen. A lot of strange lights. That's Fudge the dog, who was very upset when Ben collapsed. And you tell me, all right? So again, these are, Ben mentioned the Green Children of Woolpit, all sorts of things that have happened within 40 miles of this area. Classic Tlap kind of stuff from all through history, all the way back to Saxon times. And here's just the newest one, Windham County, Connecticut, April 23rd. You can see the strange pattern of lights in the sky. This was taken by a relative of ours, so I trust it. And possibly our next Tlap area, Western Connecticut, Eastern Rhode Island. I should say Western Rhode Island, Eastern Connecticut. So again, the multiverse, you can look this up. It's becoming more and more accepted. It's just the interpretation that is disagreed upon. Very, very simplistic illustration. You've got worlds overlapping, and as a matter of fact, physicists will describe them as bubbles. And they will describe the Big Bang, which itself is in some dispute now, as an explosion of a space-time foam. Foam, almost like, think of it as your bathtub or your sink, and you've got all sorts of strange bubbles colliding, combining in certain places, and that essentially describes the multiverse. But it seems to be more like this. Since you got up this morning, you apparently have been proceeding through many, 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 maybe even millions of parallel realities, parallel worlds, but it's part of a world family. So your consciousness, or our mass consciousness, keeps it logical. But it's when there's a little bit of a glitch. People were talking about before about putting your keys down on the table, you turn around and they're at the other end of the table, or they're not there at all. Or someone was telling us before about being in traffic, looking in, seeing a cute guy or a cute girl in the car behind you, and all of a sudden you look again and there's a totally different person, and there's nowhere they could have gone. Those are one of those things to us. By the end of the day, we forget about it. But if something starts playing frisbee with your mother's fine china in your dining room, that's what you remember, and that's what gets into the books. Poltergeist activity. And I've seen plenty of that. And again, there was this evidence here of the Stella Lansing, who lived in Massachusetts, who would take these pictures, and if it was legitimate, all these strange things would come out in the pictures. Why aren't they here? Okay, there we go. And she would get strange figures, and these are not what she claimed she was taking pictures of. The odd thing was that she would use the movie film, old movie film, which I'm having a senior moment, I can't remember what it was called, but it did not have an audio track. When they would develop it, it would have an audio track, which wasn't physically possible. So again, a possible evidence of the multiverse, once again, parallel worlds right next to us all the time. And here's, this is Ted Sirios, whom I knew in the 60s and 70s, early 70s. He was active. He would look into, he didn't even have to snap the shutter. He would look into a camera, or sometimes he didn't even need a camera. He would look at a packet of film, and what he was thinking of would come out on the film. So he said, but all these odd things would come out on the film. Sort of an odd form of remote viewing, as it's called. So again, I knew him. He was a nice guy, but he had a drinking problem. He was known to the police, but he could do this. I can verify that. So again, why all the military interest in these flap areas? As I said, I think we're trying to weaponize the paranormal. Wouldn't we love to do that?
Well, I mean, we've been trying to weaponize the paranormal since the 50s, really, because the Soviets had a very, they had a really fun propaganda program where they had this woman who was supposedly the most powerful psychic that ever lived, who could move objects with her mind. And there were all these like videos leaking out from the Soviet Union of this woman moving like a pencil with her mind. The U.S. military was like, oh God, we got to get on this. So they created Project Stargate, which still exists to this day. Although now it's probably more spooky stuff, but the stuff we do know about is essentially psyops, which were basically, people that could do remote viewing and blow things up from a distance. If you ever saw the movie Men Who Stare at Goats, that's essentially about Project Stargate. And, it's still going to this day, people say it's over, but it definitely isn't. So really what we're dealing with is a very narrow-minded government or military or maybe private organization that sees essentially, it's easy for people to accept aliens that are far away, distant planets or whatever, and it's easy for people to accept, 19th century spiritualism where, it's just dead people. But I think, the scary thing is, what if it's all going on right next to you? So, instead of thinking, the LED slide's gone, but whatever. So, there's us down there, and we're, experiencing everything day to day, but, it's easy to think about things far away. There's an anthropology term that essentially is like, it's perceived distance. So if you're thinking about like, the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, or ISIS or whatever, you're like, that's far away, that doesn't affect me. And the way it's portrayed is, it's portrayed as far away, but if you hear of a school shooting or something, you're like, oh God, that's like right next door. It could be in California, Arizona, somewhere that's about 2,000-3,000 miles away, but it still is portrayed as if it's right there, right next to you at all times, perceived distance. So if we perceive the distance of, all of our greatest fears as far away, that's fine, that's okay. but at any moment in time, you know, a flying saucer could crash right through here if the multiverse theory is correct. Well, you're right, it is down the street. So, I mean, you know, the scary part is all of this is going on right next to us all the time if the ducks are lined up.
Yeah, and we find that Bigfoot is kept secret as well. Why would that be the case? Well, again, it's all part, we think, of the military knowing about the multiverse and knowing about flap areas. Wouldn't we love to be able to know where Bigfoot goes and where Bigfoot comes from, like in that field with me that night in Pennsylvania? Because wouldn't we love to be able to militarize the paranormal? I think that's what the secrecy is perhaps all about. That's our theory anyway. So again, nothing is what it appears to be. Everything you know is wrong, and it's the first day of school. It's probably a safe place to begin. And we're just about out of time, but we'll do some shameless self-promotion here. At our book table, a few steps away, we got all these books. The one on the right is probably of no interest whatsoever, The History of Rhode Island. However, well, that's where we're from, and it's used in a couple of school districts if you happen to be interested in that. And our two latest books, Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong, and Behind the Paranormal 2, Bigfoot, Mothman, Man, and Monsters You Never Heard Of. That's all out there, and you're welcome to take a look at that. And here we are. This is our best. And we invite you tomorrow to come to the live broadcast of our show from this very room at noon to 1 o'clock. And there's no time for questions now, but we will be taking plenty of questions from the audience at that broadcast tomorrow. And we're going to have a panel of the speakers. And it's a lot. We did it last year. It was a lot of fun. And Ben lost about 10 years off his life being the producer. But we have another producer coming up from our station in Rhode Island to handle that. So it'll be a lot of fun. So please come and enjoy that and participate. And thanks for coming.